Who are some of your role models or mentors?
Oh my God, endless list of them, I think. And at different points, they've always come from different parts of my life. So, but I would say most recently, like what sort of, I always say kind of like took me and spun me on my head was certainly that experience that I had when I did project management certification, and I enrolled in the Project Management Institute, had a mentorship program. And my mentor through that, he was absolutely incredible. I was like, how do I go from being a clinician to a project manager? You know, that was my little naive entry into like my mentorship relationship. And he's like, well, let's take a step back. And he was awesome and really inspired me to think differently, like I said, and really get in touch with my own personal mission and values and, you know, what I can bring to the world versus like looking at the next job title. And once I got there, I would say, you know, I've had the benefit of having some really incredible people that I've worked with and for. So one of my managers, Toronto Central CCAC, Elaine, she was just phenomenal. And I think not only was she visionary and an empowering distributed leadership type style, but she was also very empathetic. And to me, I hadn't experienced a leader like that in my career, and that was highly impactful and really shaped how I wanted to be in the world. She really introduced me to quality improvement, which was really my thing. I was like, wow, okay, I found a word, a term, like an expertise for what I bring, because, you know, I'd always had this knack for like finding problems, solving problems, trying new things. And then I'm like, oh wait, there's a whole science around this. Like I can actually call it something. I can actually get a master's in it. This is great. In something that I really love to do. And that is sort of natural to me. And then, you know, when I took the Health Links job, Deb Egan is another huge mentor of mine. And she was a very visionary leader, super smart, loved learning alongside of her and working with her every day. And I'm still in contact with her now. And we just have a great, you know, she's really inspiring in terms of like her vision for the world and very mission driven and really taught me the fundamentals of, you know, how you create social movements. And so that was a huge eye-opening thing for me. She introduced me to the Center for Social Innovation, how to create inclusive communities, you know, that whole social grassroots, you know, how to create a coalition of the willing to get behind you. So that was really impactful. She also introduced me to Helen Bevan, which I would say is probably I always say she's my, you know, I aspire to be a Helen Bevan in the world. And for those people who don't know Helen Bevan, she works out of the UK, and she's one of the gurus and sort of founders of this movement of quality improvement. And, you know, I've had the benefit of going to a few of her sessions, and she had one that was called How to Rock the Boat and Stay in It. And so as a natural disruptor and change advocate that I am, you know, it gave me that sense of like, okay, like, you know, all these things that I get dissatisfied with, I can actually turn them into a productive change mission. And so she's one of my huge like beacons that I always look at, and I think, okay, if I can be like Helen Bevan, then I'm doing something right in the world. There's so many people that I really do put in that category, but I would just say that those three in the recent history have been the most impactful so far.
Yeah, who would say is your biggest inspiration in your life?
I want to say is my parents, for sure. And just the way that they have always, you know, they came from very diverse backgrounds, and the way that they always invested in education and inspired us to see beyond the walls of just our own community, and always opened up our home to everyone. We had a very bustling home, and it was always filled with people. Like my parents, I would say they really inspired me to always embrace everybody as they are and as they come to you, and to really connect. Like they had really deep connections and relationships with people in their community, and people were always made to feel like family as soon as they came through our door. And I just have aspired, like I think I just bring that because that's who they were, and it inspires me to be a better person, but also a better leader, because as soon as people walk through any of my doors, I want them to feel like they're seen, they're cared about, and they're welcomed.
What are some of the things you are learning now or listening to, reading, and that you want to be working on?
Yeah, my problem is that I want to learn everything. So when I get in on a topic, I want to learn it all. Like I'm constantly seeking out things to learn so I can go on learning overload. But right now, what I'm really focused on learning is I'm reading a couple of books right now. So I'm a book dabbler. So I go back and forth. I always have two on my nightstand that I go back and forth with, and it depends on the night. Like if I want something that's a bit more nonfiction or if I want something that's a bit more of a story. So right now I have two books, and the one I'm reading right now is How to Be an Anti-Racist, and really learning more and going deep into, what it means to be a supporter and a champion of creating diverse and inclusive communities, and what does that really mean, and learning more about, bias and racism. It's really quite interesting when you dive deep on the topic. So I'm learning more about that right now. I also get Harvard Business Review, so I like to read a lot of that. So I'm really into reading their magazines and a lot of their podcasts. I listen to a lot of podcasts, so I have quite a few. So I actually
What's your favorite one?
My favorite one, Brene Brown.
Oh, right. Yeah, I love her too.
I love her.
Yeah.
And in terms of learning, I would say more formally, like I've just finished a finance fundamentals course for my entrepreneurship journey on my spare time. And it was run by the Female Entrepreneur Association. And it was a fantastic course on like how to fund your business and different sources of funding and, all that kind of stuff. And it was just really fascinating to me. So I've learned a lot about that. So
now is that the next step in your business, you're trying to get funding, secure funding to grow it? Yeah.
It's really interesting learning that landscape and like what you need, and just taking it one step at a time. Like I've been learning a lot in the business space, but it's really fascinating because it totally applies. Like I would encourage any leader in healthcare not to just focus on learning. Like I think the diversity in my learning has also led really well to my career because I have a lot of that business development experience now, which not a lot of leaders in health, I would say right now, have that entrepreneurial experience. And it brings so much to your organization to think like an entrepreneur and, to think about, bringing more of those terms into like a traditional like healthcare organization space. So I'll say things to my team like, okay, what's our value proposition here? Like this program, like what value are we bringing to the client, to, the health system, to, and helping people to think that way, I think has really broadened, also our organizational capability, because people are thinking in a different way. When you start to think like an entrepreneur, you create more value and you bring in that innovation, and people are thinking differently about how to design programs and services when you have that. So I used to always think like, okay, well, learning about like they were two separate things, like the entrepreneur me and the VP at Bellwoods me, but it's actually just me. And I bring myself to both. And like what I learn in one sphere, I'm bringing into, my business and entrepreneurial stuff. But what I'm learning from that side, I'm bringing into the Bellwoods side. There is a nice synergy that happens when you're learning diverse things. I used to think like, because I'm in health leadership, I should just learn about health leadership. No, learn about everything else in the world. And you'll be a better leader as a result.
Right, because that gives you that outside the box perspective, right? Now they're talking a lot about entrepreneurship, and any business sort of dies if you don't innovate. I mean, in Canada is a little different because the funding model is a little different, but still there's so much value to that entrepreneurship lens if we're able to, go there.
And we're starting to break some of those rules and get people comfortable with that. And I think that's what I bring into conversations is like, okay, well, that's not how it's done. That's okay. How are we going to break that silo? How are we going to get over that mountain? How are we going to, start taking the first brick off of that wall? And we don't have to do it all at once. And thinking like that, I think has really, brought benefit to my role and to the team. And hopefully, on a broader level, I think that's the exciting part about being in the position that I am is when I made the move from clinician, and we'll go back full circle to the first question you had, but when you go from being a clinician and you see problems on a one-to-one person, you get really frustrated because there's very little influence that you have on a large level to make it better for the collective. You could make it better for this specific client, but I always got really frustrated because I could see the big system problem, and I couldn't do anything to move that forward for them. And then you move into leadership roles, and I always say I was kind of like a reluctant leader, but the reason I say that is because of the title, right? And I'm like, but when you start to get into these leadership roles, you see like, oh my gosh, like the impact that you can have on such a larger level on policy, on funding decisions, you know, and you have to be really mindful of that and responsible with it in presenting your ideas. But when you can do that in a way that builds the case for the change, it's really powerful to see it go into action, because it's a real change that happens on a much larger level for a larger, broader audience of clients, right? And that's what excites me about being in leadership.